17 million lives.
6 million Jews.
3 million Polish Jews.
The Holocaust.
Never forget.
On September 1st, 1939, immediately after the German troops invaded Poland, Jewish civilians were killed and their property destroyed. 50,000 Jewish-owned houses, factories, workshops, and stores were destroyed. The Nazis instituted a campaign and burned down Jewish synagogues and turned them into warehouses, bathrooms, and stables. During these burnings, the fires often were not kept under control, and the surrounding Jewish houses were burnt down too. Not only were their houses burnt down, but Jewish people burned to death as well. Additionally, mass arrests of Jews were taking place, and thousands of men, women, and children were put in civilian prison camps. Soldiers were instructed to arrest Jews and Poles of military age, which led to a complete attack on the Jewish community. During these military operations, hundreds of civilian Jews in different cities throughout Poland were killed. Torture, forced labor, and segregation continued as a ploy to further dehumanize the Jews.
After the Nazis seized control over Germany in 1939, 2 million Polish Jews were under German control. In order to maintain control, the Nazis forced the Jews to reside in marked-off sections of towns and cities called ghettos, or Jewish residential quarters. Many ghettos were set up in cities and towns where Jews were already concentrated. The Germans usually marked off the oldest, most run-down sections of the cities for the ghettos. Sometimes they even evicted non-Jewish residents from the buildings to make room for Jewish families. Many of the ghettos were enclosed by barbed wire fences or walls, with entrances guarded by local and German police and SS members. During curfew hours at night, the residents were forced to stay inside their apartments. Some of the ghettos in Poland were Bezdin, Białystok, Grodno, Krakow, Lodz, Lublin, Radom, and lastly, one of the most infamous ghettos, the Warsaw Ghetto. On October 16, 1940, the largest ghetto located in Poland's capital, Warsaw, was created. The population of the ghetto was more than 500,000 people, and unemployment was a large problem in the ghetto. Organizations such as hospitals, soup kitchens, and orphanages were formed, as well as a school system. Still, however, many Jews died of epidemics and hunger, and the streets were filled with corpses. If Jews in the ghetto could not afford burial, the bodies were left unburied. Additionally, prayer groups and yeshivas were organized, and many Jews had hope at first and believed that this suffering would bring the Messiah. In the summer of 1942, the first mass deportation of 300,000 Jews to Treblinka occurred. There was a cap of 35,000 people allowed in the ghetto at a time. In January 1943, there was a second deportation to Treblinka, and an uninspected Jewish resistance group forced the Nazis to leave the ghetto after just 4 days of deportation. Shortly after this, social institutions and the Judenrat could not function, and merely walking on the street became illegal. Jewish fighters gained support from the Polish underground, an organization resisting authority. In April 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising officially began. German troops entered the ghetto to begin another round of deportations, and the Jewish fighting organization did not allow the Germans to defeat them. The Germans changed tactics and began burning down houses. The Jewish fighting organization headquarters fell on May 16, 1943. Later in May, the ghetto was liquidated, and the Germans blew up the Great Synagogue in victory. 60,000 Jews died in the ghetto uprising. Despite this defeat, the uprising empowered Jews in Poland, leading to armed resistance in other ghettos as well.
There were many concentration and death camps in Poland, such as Stutthof, Chelmno, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Belzec, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Majdanek, the largest being Auschwitz. At least 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz complex between 1940 and 1945. Of these 1.3 million, approximately 1.1 million people were murdered. Of the 1.1 million murdered, 960,000 Jews were killed. During the Holocaust, concentration camp prisoners received tattoos only at one location, Auschwitz. Only those prisoners selected for work were issued serial numbers, but the prisoners sent directly to the gas chambers were not registered and received no tattoos. Construction began in April 1940 in an abandoned Polish army barracks in a suburb of the city. SS authorities continuously used prisoners for forced labor to expand the camp. Auschwitz I was constructed for 3 purposes. 1, to incarcerate real and perceived enemies of the Nazi regime and the German occupation authorities in Poland for an indefinite period of time. 2, to provide a supply of forced laborers for deployment in SS-owned construction-related enterprises. 3, to serve as a site to kill small, targeted groups of the population whose death was determined by the SS and police authorities. Auschwitz I had a gas chamber and crematorium. At Auschwitz I, SS physicians carried out medical experiments in the hospital Barrack 10. They conducted pseudoscientific research on infants, twins, and dwarfs, and performed forced sterilizations and castrations of adults. Construction of Auschwitz II, or Auschwitz-Birkenau, began at Brzezinka in October 1941. The Auschwitz-Birkenau camp had the largest total prisoner population. It was divided into 10 sections separated by electrified barbed wire fences. Like Auschwitz I, it was patrolled by SS guards, including, after 1942, SS dog handlers. Auschwitz-Birkenau was also a killing center and played a central role in the German effort to kill Jews of Europe. Around the beginning of September 1941, the SS at Auschwitz I conducted the first test of Zyklon B, the first transport of Jewish men, women, and children sent to Auschwitz as part of the final solution were murdered in this gas chamber in February and March 1942. Jewish deportees arriving at Auschwitz-Birkenau immediately underwent selection. The SS staff chose some of the able-bodied for forced labor and sent the rest directly to the gas chambers, which were disguised as shower installations to mislead the victims. On October 7, 1944, several hundred prisoners assigned to Crematorium 4 at Auschwitz-Birkenau rebelled after learning that they were going to be killed. During the uprising, the prisoners killed 3 guards and blew up the crematorium and adjacent gas chamber. The prisoners used explosives smuggled into the camp by Jewish women who had been assigned to forced labor in a nearby armaments factory. The Germans crushed the revolts and killed almost all the prisoners involved in the rebellion. The Jewish women who had smuggled the explosives into the camp were publicly hanged in early January 1945. Auschwitz III, also called Buna or Monowitz, was established in October 1942. It housed prisoners assigned to work at the Buna synthetic rubber works located at the outskirts of the small village of Monowitz. From May 1941 until July 1942, the SS had transported prisoners from Auschwitz I to the Buna detachment, at first on foot and later by rail. With the construction of Auschwitz III in the autumn of 1942, prisoners deployed at Buna lived in Auschwitz III.
In mid-January 1945, as Soviet forces approached the Auschwitz concentration camp complex, the SS began evacuating Auschwitz and its subcamps. SS units forced nearly 60,000 prisoners to march west from the Auschwitz camp system. Thousands had been killed in the camps in the days before these death marches began. SS guards shot anyone who fell behind or could not continue. Prisoners also suffered from the cold weather, starvation, and exposure on these marches. Possibly as many as 15,000 prisoners died during the evacuation marches from Auschwitz and the subcamps. In late January 1945, SS and police officials forced 4,000 prisoners to evacuate Lachhammer on foot. Lachhammer was a subcamp of Auschwitz-Monowitz. The SS murdered about 800 prisoners during the march to the Gross-Rosen concentration camp. SS officials also killed as many as 200 prisoners left behind in the Blachhammer as a result of illness or unsuccessful attempts to hide. After a brief delay, the SS transported around 3,000 Blachhammer prisoners from Gross-Rosen to the Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet army entered Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Monowitz and liberated more than 6,000 prisoners, most of whom were ill and dying.
Not long after the end of World War II, Jewish life began being restored. The first attempts at restoring Jewish life took place in Lublin. Surviving Jews in Lublin gained equal rights, and this led to the establishment of the Jewish Committee. The committee's main objectives were to support Jews in restoring their lives. It soon became centered on social and cultural activities. The Polish government supported the movement and encouraged the restoration of Jewish communal life. The Jewish Committee comprised 10 districts, 2 sub-districts, and about 200 local committees. The committee led to the creation of businesses, newspapers, schools, Zionist youth movements, and the societies of Jewish writers and Jewish arts and culture. The JDC was an organization that entered Poland in 1945 and helped support Jews regarding welfare agencies, health, children, basic necessities, and helped Jews find work. The Polish government supported Jewish communal restoration and aspirations and maintained a friendly relationship. Moreover, Jewish religious life was renewed in all the towns Jews resettled. Tragically, most of the rabbis and yeshiva students did not survive. However, there were few who did. The Union of Religious Communities was established and attended to Jewish needs through the 2 synagogues still standing in Warsaw and Wrocław. The Union established prayer houses, provided kosher foods, and founded kosher kitchens and dedicated Jewish cemeteries and helped with the burials of Jewish victims of the war. Through these organizations and committees, Jewish life and community were able to be restored. Jews returned to work and reestablished communities in everyday life. When Poland was liberated in 1945, thousands of orphaned and abandoned Jewish children wandered the streets of villages and towns. Most children were taken into non-Jewish Polish homes, baptized, or taken in and exploited as a means of cheap labor. There were 3 institutions that worked to save Jewish children: the Official Jewish Committee, the Jewish Religious Council, and the Zionist Movement's Coordination. These organizations created various institutions for homeless children. Boarding schools, children's homes, and nurseries were all established across Poland. These institutions also helped reunite surviving parents with their children. Although to a certain degree Jewish life was on a path to restoration, it was never the same. Why? Because 3 million Polish Jews were murdered, and the Jews felt they had no place in Europe.